My dear child, if you can't stop sinning even though you hate it, then you already know the silent war I'm about to describe. The kind that nobody else sees. The kind that happens behind closed doors. So, in quiet moments, in late nights, in thoughts you wish you never had. Because the truth is, the pain is not just in the sin, it's in the contradiction. You love God, you want to do right, you genuinely hate what you keep doing, and yet somehow you keep going back to it, again and again, and every time you fall, it feels heavier than the last. Not just guilt, but confusion, frustration, even a kind of helplessness. Like something inside you is pulling in two different directions. One part of you reaching toward God, and another part dragging you back into the same pattern. And maybe you've started asking yourself questions you're afraid to say out loud. Why do I keep doing this if I hate it? What's wrong with me? Am I even serious about my faith? And slowly, those questions begin to turn into accusations, into shame, into a quiet distance between you and God, because the more you fall, the less worthy you feel to come close to Him again. But listen carefully, because this is where everything begins to shift. What you're experiencing is not proof that you don't care. It's actually proof that you do. The fact that you hate your sin is evidence that something inside you is alive, that your heart has not become numb, that your conscience is still awake, and that matters more than you realize. Because there are people who sin and feel nothing, no conviction, no struggle, no desire to change, but you feel the tension, the discomfort, the resistance, and that is not your weakness. That is the beginning of your transformation. But the reason you feel stuck is not because change is impossible. It's because you've been trying to win a spiritual battle using only surface-level effort. You've been focusing on stopping the action while ignoring the process that leads to it. And sin is never just an action. It's a sequence. It's a progression that starts long before you ever act. It begins with a thought, then that. Thought lingers, then it becomes an image, then a desire, and by the time you reach the moment of decision, your resistance is already weakened. And that's why you feel like you can't stop, because you're trying to fight at the final stage when the momentum is already against you. But what if I told you, your real power is not at the end of the process. It's at the beginning, in the moment you first notice the thought, in the second you feel the shift in your attention. That is where the battle is won or lost. Not later, not when it becomes intense, but when it's still small, still quiet, still easy to dismiss. And I know what you might be thinking, but the thoughts just come. I can't control that. You're right. You can't always control what enters your mind, but you can control what stays, what you entertain, what you allow to grow. And every time you let a thought sit longer than it should, you are feeding something that will later fight against you. And this is where most people misunderstand the struggle. They think their problem is lack of willpower, but the real issue is lack of awareness. Because if you were fully aware of how early the process begins, you would stop trying to fight at the last moment and start guarding the first moment. And that changes everything, because now you're not waiting until you're overwhelmed. You're acting when you're still in control, and that's where your strength actually works. But let's go deeper, because there's another layer to this that you cannot ignore, and it's the emotional side of sin. Because many times, you're not just sinning because of desire, you're sinning because of what you're feeling. Stress, boredom, loneliness, rejection, emptiness. And instead of dealing with those emotions directly, you turn to something that gives you temporary relief, something that distracts you, something that numbs the discomfort, even if only for a moment. And over time, your brain begins to associate that behavior with relief. So every time you feel that emotion again, it pushes you back toward the same habit. Not because you want the sin, but because you want the escape. And this is why just stop doesn't work. Because you're not replacing what the habit was giving you. You're removing it, but leaving the need unaddressed. And that need will always search for something to fill it. So if you truly want to break this cycle, you have to go deeper than behavior. You have to start identifying your triggers, your patterns, the moments when you're most vulnerable. Because once you see the pattern clearly, you can interrupt it intentionally. And one of the most powerful things you can do is to change your response in that moment. Not later, not after you've already fallen into it, but right when you feel it beginning. When the urge is still forming, when the thought is still light. because that is when your decision has the most power, and this is where your first step begins. You must stop negotiating with sin completely. No more just this once. No more I'll stop after this. No more it's not that serious. Because every time you say those words, you are giving permission. You are lowering your guard. You are stepping into the same trap you've fallen into before, and deep down, you already know where it leads. So instead of trying to control it, you remove yourself from it immediately. You change the environment. You shift your focus. You move your body. You do whatever it takes to break the moment, because the longer you stay, the harder it becomes to leave. And don't confuse delay with control. Staying longer is not strength, it's surrender in slow motion. Now, the second thing you must do is retrain your mind, because right now, your mind has been shaped by repetition. The more you repeat a behavior, the easier it becomes, and that's why it feels automatic. But what has been trained can be untrained, and what has been built can be rebuilt. But it requires consistency, not intensity. You don't need one perfect day. You need many intentional moments, over and over again, where you choose differently, where you replace the old pattern with a new one. And this is where input matters. What you watch, what you listen to, what you focus on daily, because your mind is always absorbing, always storing, always preparing material that it will later replay, especially in moments of weakness. So if you are constantly feeding it things that trigger you, you are making your battle harder than it needs to be. But if you begin to change your inputs slowly, intentionally, your thoughts will begin to change as well, and the urges that once felt overwhelming will start to lose their intensity, not instantly, but gradually, as your mind becomes aligned with something different, something better, something stronger. And now the third thing, and this might be the hardest for you, you must stop hiding, because as long as your struggle stays in the dark, it stays powerful. Secrecy protects sin. It allows it to grow without resistance. And the enemy wants you to believe that you're alone, that nobody would understand, that if you told someone, they would judge you, reject you, look at you differently, so you stay silent. And in that silence, the cycle continues. But the moment you bring it into the light, its power begins to break, because now it's not just you anymore. Now there is accountability. Now there is support. Now there is truth being spoken into your life when your own thoughts start to lie to you again. And no, you don't need to tell everyone, but you need at least one person, someone you trust, someone mature, someone who can walk with you through this, because you were never meant to fight alone. And listen, this is important. Your struggle does not make you a hypocrite. It does not make you a failure. It does not mean God has rejected you. It means you are in a real battle. And the fact that you hate your sin means your heart is still sensitive, still responsive, still capable of change. And God is not standing at a distance waiting for you to fix yourself. He is right there in the middle of your struggle, offering you strength, guidance, and grace, not to excuse your sin, but to help you rise above it. And maybe right now you feel tired of trying, tired of failing, tired of starting over. But don't let that tiredness turn into surrender, because you are closer to breakthrough than you think. Not because you've been perfect, but because you're finally starting to understand the truth, that this battle is not about trying harder, it's about fighting smarter, earlier, deeper, with awareness, with intention, with consistency. And here's your challenge. Don't try to fix everything at once. Just choose one thing, one pattern, one trigger, one habit, and change that this week. Just one, because that's how real transformation begins. Not with overwhelming pressure, but with focused decisions, repeated daily. And if you fall again, don't run away from God. Run back to Him immediately, without delay, without shame, because the longer you stay away, the harder it becomes to return. And the enemy will try to convince you that you've gone too far this time. But that's a lie. You are still chosen, still loved, still capable of change. And this struggle, it's not here to destroy you. It's here to refine you, to teach you discipline, awareness, dependence, things that will strengthen every part of your life. So don't give up now. Not when you're beginning to see clearly. Not when you're starting to fight differently. Stay in the process. Stay committed and watch what begins to change, starting from within. My dear child, now that you've begun to understand that this battle is deeper than just behavior, I need you to see something even more important. something that most people never realize, and because of that, they stay stuck for years. You are not just fighting sin, you are fighting agreement, because every time you fall into something you hate, there is a moment before it where you silently agree with it, not out loud, not intentionally, but in a quiet, subtle way inside your mind. A moment where you stop resisting and start justifying. A moment where the voice in your head shifts from "this is wrong" to "it's not that serious," from "I shouldn't do this" to "just this once." And that moment right there, that quiet internal agreement, is where the real decision is made, not when the action happens, but when your resistance softens, when your guard drops, when you allow the thought to stay instead of rejecting it immediately. And if you don't learn to recognize that moment, you will keep blaming yourself for what happens later, without ever addressing what happened first. And that's why you feel trapped, because you think the battle is about stopping the action, but the battle is actually about refusing the agreement, and that changes everything. Because now your focus shifts. You're no longer waiting until things get intense. You're paying attention when they're still quiet, when the thought is still small, when the feeling is still manageable. And I know what you're thinking, but it happens so fast, I don't even realize it until it's too late. And that's exactly why you need to slow down your awareness, because your life is not happening as fast as it feels. Your mind is just moving without observation, and when you don't observe your thoughts, they control you. But the moment you begin to notice them, to catch them early, you take back control. And this is where discipline begins. Not in dramatic moments, but in small interruptions, in the quiet. Decision to say no before the desire grows. And this leads to something you must understand clearly. You cannot build a new life while protecting old patterns. Something has to be removed, not temporarily, but intentionally, because right now, there are things in your life that are feeding the very struggle you're praying to escape. Environments, habits, routines, content, and even certain conversations. And as long as those things remain unchanged, your results will remain unchanged. You can pray, you can promise, you can feel bad, but if your environment stays the same, your behavior will eventually follow it. Because environment shapes decision more than emotion does. And that's why you keep falling in the same places, at the same times, in the same situations, because nothing around you has changed. So how can you expect something inside you to change consistently? And this is where you need to become serious, not emotional, serious about protecting your future, serious about removing what weakens you, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it feels inconvenient, because freedom requires separation. Separation from the things that keep pulling you back. And I'm not just talking about obvious things. I'm talking about the subtle ones too. The things you justify. The things you tell yourself are not that bad. Because those are often the most dangerous. They don't look like the problem, but they slowly lead you toward it. And before you know it, you're back in the same place again, wondering how it happened. But it didn't happen suddenly. It happened step by step, decision by decision. And now it's time to reverse that process, step by step, decision by decision, starting with what you allow into your life daily, because your inputs shape your thoughts, and your thoughts shape your actions. And if your inputs remain unchanged, your outputs will too. So you have to become intentional about what you watch, what you listen to, what you scroll, through what you expose your mind to. Because your mind is not just observing, it is absorbing, storing, preparing material that will later return in moments of weakness. And if you've been feeding it things that trigger you, even casually, even occasionally, you are strengthening the very thing you're trying to break. And then later, you blame yourself for not being strong enough, when in reality, you've been making your own battle harder. And this is not about perfection. It's about awareness. It's about making better decisions consistently, even if they feel small, even if they don't seem significant in the moment, because those small decisions are building something inside you, either discipline or dependency. And right now, you get to choose which one you are strengthening. But let me take you even deeper, because there's another layer to this, and it's the way you see yourself. Because your identity shapes your behavior more than your intentions ever will. If deep down you see yourself as someone who just struggles with this, someone who can't really change, someone who always ends up failing, then your actions will continue to reflect that belief, even if you don't want them to, because your mind will always try to stay consistent with what it believes is true about you. So, if you want your behavior to change, your identity must shift first. You must begin to see yourself differently, not as someone who is trapped, but as someone who is learning, growing, becoming disciplined, becoming aware, becoming stronger over time. And this is not about pretending. It's about aligning yourself with truth, because you are not your worst mistake. You are not your repeated failures. You are someone in the process of transformation. And when you begin to see yourself that way, your decisions will slowly start to follow. Because now you're not just reacting to urges, you're acting in alignment with who you are becoming. And that shift, it's powerful. But it requires consistency, because one moment of clarity will not change everything. It's the repeated moments, the daily choices, the quiet discipline that builds real change over time. And yes, there will still be moments when you feel weak. Moments when the urge feels stronger than your resolve. Moments when your mind tries to convince you that giving in will make things easier. And in those moments, you must remember something very important. Giving in does not solve the problem. It delays it. It gives you a temporary escape, but it leaves you with a deeper struggle, and you already know that. You've experienced it over and over again. So instead of chasing temporary relief, start building lasting strength by choosing discomfort in the moment instead of regret afterwards. Because every time you resist, even when it's hard, you are building something inside you that will make the next decision easier, and the next, and the next, until one day what once felt impossible becomes natural. Not because the temptation disappeared, but because you changed. Your patterns changed, your responses changed, your awareness increased, and your discipline grew. And if you fall again, because you might, don't let that fall define you. Don't let it turn into a reason to quit, because one mistake does not erase your progress unless you allow it to. And this is where many people lose, not in the fall, but in what they do after it. They fall once, and then they stay down. They fall once, and then they give up. They fall once, and then they tell themselves, what's the point? And that mindset keeps them trapped longer than the sin itself. But you don't have to do that. You can fall and still get back up immediately, without shame controlling you, without rolling. Distance from God growing, because God is not waiting for you to be perfect. He is waiting for you to be honest, to return quickly, to keep moving forward, even if it's slow, even if it's messy. Because progress is not about never falling. It's about refusing to stay down. And every time you get back up, you weaken the hold that sin has on you, and you strengthen the part of you that wants to grow, and that matters more than you realize. So here's your challenge now. Don't just focus on avoiding sin. Focus on building a life that makes it harder to fall into it. Structure your time. Remove your triggers. Replace your habits. Shift your environment. Change your inputs. And most importantly, stay connected to God daily, not out of fear, but out of dependence. Because you cannot become who you're meant to be while staying in the same patterns that are holding you back. Something has to change, and that change begins with small, consistent, intentional decisions made every single day, and if you stay committed to that, you will not remain the same. You will grow, you will strengthen, you will overcome, not instantly, but steadily. And one day, you will look back at this version of yourself, the one who felt stuck, the one who felt trapped, and you will realize you were never powerless, you were just unaware, and now you are awake, and that changes everything.